Are you the one who called 911?
Yes. I'm the homeowner.
Someone was prying the kitchen window.
Don't move!
No.
The line is still connected. What is your emergency?
The last sound First Lieutenant Danielle Reeves ever heard out of her left ear was a police officer screaming at her to drop it. She was standing in her own kitchen at 2 in the morning, in her own socks, with her hands open and her voice low and steady, doing the exact thing she had been trained to do under fire, which was to stay calm while the world came apart around her. "Drop it!" the officer screamed again.
"It is just a pot," she said softly. "It is boiling. I am moving it off the heat so nobody gets hurt. My hands are right here. You can see my hands."
He could see her hands. He could see the raised palms, the empty fingers, the pot lifted an inch off a warm burner. He could have seen, if he had wanted to, the woman who 6 months earlier had pulled 3 soldiers out of a flash flood in a valley whose name he could not have pronounced, and had been given a medal for doing it. He did not see any of that. He saw only what he had already decided to see. And then there was a sound like the whole world slamming a steel door, and a white bar of pain across her chest, and then, on her left side, nothing. No ring, no echo. A silence so total and so instant that for one confused second she believed she had died. She had not died. She had fallen against her own cabinets with her collarbone shattered and the nerve to her left ear torn in two. And as she slid down onto the floor of the kitchen, she had painted herself. She was already learning the shape of the rest of her life inside that brand new, one-sided quiet. And through the ringing wreckage of her right ear, she heard the man who had just shot her begin the first sentence of a lie he had somehow already finished building. "She lunged at me," he said. "You all saw it. She lunged." Nobody had seen it because it had not happened. But one other person in that house had a camera still running, and that was the thing that was going to bring an entire wall of silence crashing down. And there was something else. Something no one in that kitchen knew about. Not the officers, not even Danielle, bleeding on her own floor. The most important witness to what had just happened was not a person at all. It was sitting quietly on a small table by the front door, and it was listening to every word. It would stay untouched in an evidence file for 11 months while an entire country argued about everything except the one thing that could end the case. And on the day someone finally thought to press play, it would take a police officer's whole story and burn it to ash in 90 seconds. But that was 11 months away. First, the lie had to almost win. Everything Danielle Reeves did that night, she did exactly right. That was the part that would haunt everyone who learned the details, the part that made it unbearable. She followed every single rule she had ever been given, and the rules did not save her. Because Danielle Reeves was not some random civilian who panicked. She was a first lieutenant in the United States Army, 31 years old, and 6 months before a police officer decided she was a threat in her own kitchen. The Army had decided something very different about her. They had given her a medal. Not a medal for killing. A medal for the exact opposite. In a valley half a world away, a flash flood had come down out of the mountains faster than anyone could react. And while trained soldiers froze on the bank, Danielle had gone into the water 3 times. She pulled 3 men out of a current that should have taken her with them, and the Army had pinned the soldier's medal on her chest, the highest honor a soldier can be given for risking their life to save someone else. That was who Derek Faulkner shot. A woman whose whole life was the habit of running toward people when everyone else ran away. And a lawyer was going to stand up in a courtroom 11 months from now and try very hard to make 12 strangers forget it. That was who she was. Calm underwater. Calm under fire. Calm. She was home on extended leave, sleeping lightly the way soldiers always sleep, in a little house in a quiet town. She had survived a war. It had never once occurred to her that the most dangerous night of her life would happen not in a war zone, but in her own kitchen, at the hands of the very people she had been raised to call for help. The scraping started at 2:14 in the morning. It came from the kitchen window. A slow, deliberate scrape of metal on metal, the sound of someone working at a latch. and Danielle came awake all at once, fully, the way she had trained herself to. She did not panic. She did the checklist. She got low. She listened. She confirmed the sound was real and not a dream, a branch, a cat. And then she did the single most important thing, the thing that should have saved her life, the thing that in a just world would have made all of this impossible. She called 911. She kept her voice flat and clear. She gave her address. She said there was a possible break-in at her kitchen window, and then she said the words she had been trained to say. The words that were supposed to remove every doubt. "My name is First Lieutenant Danielle Reeves," she told the dispatcher. "I am active duty United States Army, home on leave. I am not armed. I am going to move to my front door and wait for your officers with my hands visible. Please tell them I am the homeowner and I am not the threat." "Copy that, Lieutenant," the dispatcher said. "Officers are 2 minutes out. Stay on the line with me, okay? Do not hang up." "I will not hang up," Danielle said. She meant it as a small courtesy, one professional to another. She had no idea she was speaking the most important sentence of the entire night. She did not hang up. That is the detail nobody thought about for 11 months. The small, ordinary thing that was going to matter more than every camera and every witness combined. She set the phone down on the little table by the front door, screen up, the line still open, still connected, still quietly listening to everything. And she stepped back into the center of her own front room with her hands raised and empty, and waited to be rescued. 2 sets of headlights swung across her front window. Help had arrived. It was the last moment of her old life, and she did not know it. 2 officers came up the walk, and from the very first second, they were not the same man wearing 2 uniforms. They were 2 entirely different responses to the same woman standing in a doorway with her hands up. The first officer was named Victor Salazar. He was younger, quieter, and when Danielle said her name and her rank through the storm door, something in him straightened. His own brother was in the National Guard. He knew what a first lieutenant was. He looked at the woman with her hands raised and her voice level, and he saw exactly what she was, which was the homeowner, calm and cooperative. And he lowered his shoulders and said, "Evening, ma'am. We got a call about your window." The second officer was named Derek Faulkner. And Derek Faulkner looked at the same woman and saw something else entirely. He saw a black woman in a gray hoodie standing in the dark. He did not hear First Lieutenant. He did not hear active duty. Later he would claim he never got a clear look at any ID, and that was almost true, because he never looked. He had decided, in the first half-second, the way he had decided 1,000 times before on 1,000 streets, who was dangerous in this picture. And once a man like Derek Faulkner decides that, no amount of calm and no piece of paper can undecide it. "Show me your hands," he barked, though her hands were already up. "They are up," Salazar said quietly, half to his partner. "Derek, her hands are up. She is the one who called it in." Faulkner did not seem to hear him. That was the thing Salazar would remember. It was not that Faulkner missed the information. It was that the information could not get in. Danielle said her rank again, slow and clear. She said, "My identification is in my back pocket. I am going to keep my hands up. I am not going to reach for anything." She did everything a person is supposed to do to make a frightened officer feel safe. And with every calm word, Faulkner seemed to wind tighter, not looser, because a man who has already decided you are dangerous hears your calm not as reassurance, but as a trick. Danielle kept her voice soft and even, the voice she used on frightened young soldiers. "Officers," she said, "the noise came from the kitchen window, at the back. I can show you exactly where. I have not touched anything. My phone is right there on the table. I am still connected to your dispatcher. She can confirm every word I am telling you." "Ma'am, we believe you," Salazar started to say. "We do not know anything yet," Faulkner cut across him. "Show us the kitchen, slow." And then, at that moment, before any of them had even stepped inside, Derek Faulkner reached up to his own chest and, with a small, deliberate motion, switched off his body camera. 11 seconds later, they were all walking toward the kitchen. She led them down the short hall, hands still visible, narrating every step like a good soldier clearing a room with civilians present. "Kitchen is just here," she said. "The window is over the sink.
That is where the scraping was. The stove was on. She had put a pot of water on to boil earlier,
before the noise. A small, ordinary thing. Tea she never got to make. And it had gone to a hard, rolling boil and was rocking slightly on the burner. And Danielle, whose entire life was the habit of preventing accidents before they happened, saw it and did what she always did.
She reached to move it off the heat.
I am just going to move this,
she said, her voice calm, her hand going slow and open toward the handle.
It is boiling over. I do not want anyone to get burned.
And Derek Faulkner, standing in the doorway of a stranger's kitchen, with his adrenaline up and his camera off, and 30 years of the wrong instincts screaming in his ears, saw a black woman reach for something on a stove, and his mind turned a pot of tea water into a weapon. "Drop it!" he screamed. "Drop it!"
It is a pot, she said softly, freezing, her hand still open, still a foot from the handle. It is just a pot. Look at my hand. My hand is open.
She did not move toward him. Every witness account, every camera, every measurement taken afterward would agree on that one fact. She did not lunge, did not swing, did not close the distance. She froze. Exactly the way she was supposed to, and she began, slowly, to lower her open hand and turn her body away from him. The universal language of a person surrendering, of a person saying, "I am no threat. Please, look at me." Beside him, Salazar saw the whole thing clearly, saw the raised palms and the tea water and the calm, and started to say, "Derek, wait, it is a pot, it is a—" The gunshot cut him off. In the enormous silence after, 3 things happened almost at once. Danielle went down against the cabinets, her collarbone gone, her left ear gone. The world on that side switched off forever. Salazar stood frozen. That was his private catastrophe, the thing he would carry for the rest of his life. For 1/2 of 1 second, the most important half-second of his career, he did nothing. He had seen it coming, and his body had not moved in time. And the man he was supposed to trust had fired into an innocent woman a foot away from him. And Victor Salazar would spend 11 months, and every night after, asking himself why his hand had not been faster. And Derek Faulkner started talking. That was the part Salazar could not get over later. Not the shot, the talking. Before the echo had even died, before he had checked on the woman bleeding on the floor, before he had done a single thing a human being does when they have just shot another human being by mistake, Faulkner was already narrating. "She lunged at me," he said, loud for the record he thought did not exist because his camera was off. "You saw it, Salazar. She came at me with it. She lunged." On the floor, through the ruin of her hearing, Danielle Reeves heard those words. And even then, even bleeding, the soldier in her understood exactly what was happening. She was not just being shot. She was being written into a story where she was the villain, and the man writing it was wearing a badge. What Derek Faulkner did not know, what he could not have known, was that his camera being off did not mean there was no record. 2 feet away, on Victor Salazar's chest, a small light was still glowing, and on a table by the front door, a phone was still connected to a dispatcher who had heard every single word. By dawn, the lie was already dressed and walking around town like the truth. The official story went out fast, the way these stories always go out fast, before anyone with the real facts can catch up. A homeowner had brandished a weapon at responding officers. An officer, fearing for his life, had discharged his firearm. The suspect was in stable condition. An internal review was underway. The department had full confidence in its officers. Every word of it was built to do one job, which was to turn Danielle Reeves from a victim into a threat before the public ever learned her name. And for a little while, it worked. There were people in that town who read the words weapon and lunged and officer feared for his life and filled in the rest with everything they had ever been taught to assume. And by the afternoon, there were already voices online saying she must have done something. They always say the person did something. In a hospital bed, Danielle woke up half-deaf, her arms strapped to her body, a police guard outside her door, as though she were the criminal. And she learned 2 things at almost the same moment. She learned that she would never hear out of her left ear again, and she learned, from a nurse who looked at her with careful pity, that the news was saying she had attacked a police officer in her own home. She asked the nurse to write it down because she could not trust her one working ear yet. And she read the words twice. Suspect. Brandished. Officer feared for his life. Each word was a small second bullet. She had called them. She had raised her hands. She had said her rank into a phone. And somewhere between her front door and the morning news, she had been turned from the person who called for help into the reason help had to shoot. She did not cry. She did not shout. She lay very still and stared at the ceiling, and did the thing she had always done, which was go cold and quiet and disappear inside her own discipline. But somewhere across town, a young officer named Victor Salazar was sitting in his car in a parking lot, not going home, staring at the small square of his own body camera footage on a laptop screen, watching an innocent woman get shot over and over and slowly coming apart. Here is what was on Victor Salazar's camera. Everything. There was Danielle at the door, hands up, calm, saying her name and her rank. There was Danielle in the hall, narrating every step. There was the kitchen, the pot, her slow open hand, her soft voice saying, "It is just a pot. Look at my hand." There was the scream, and the shot that came a full beat after she had already frozen, when she was not moving toward anyone, when her hand was open and empty and turned half away. And there was Faulkner, seconds later, inventing the lunge, on camera, in Salazar's own footage, while the woman bled on the floor behind him. There was no version of that video that could be squared with the official story. None. And Victor Salazar knew it. And that was the trap of his whole life closing around him, because he also knew exactly what happened to officers who broke ranks. He knew about the blue wall. He had leaned on it himself, in small ways, the way everyone did. He knew that the moment he handed this footage to anyone who mattered, his career was over. His friends were gone. His name was mud. And men he had trusted would call him a rat for the rest of his days. He knew there would be a quiet campaign to destroy him, and that it would probably work. He sat in that parking lot for a long time. He thought about his brother in the guard, and what he would say if he ever found out Victor had watched this happen and helped bury it. He thought about the woman in the hospital bed with the police guard at her door, as if she were the criminal. He thought about his own kids, and the day one of them would be old enough to ask him what kind of man their father had been. And then he thought about the half-second where he had seen it coming and had not moved. He could not give that half-second back. He could not make his hand faster after the fact. But there was one thing that was still in front of him instead of behind him. One thing that was still his to do, and it was the only thing that would ever let him look in a mirror again. He picked up his phone, and he did not call his union, and he did not call his sergeant. He called the FBI. Salazar's camera was going to break the blue wall of silence wide open. But it was not the only recording that survived that night. It was not even the most important one. While Victor Salazar was deciding to end his own career to tell the truth, an 80-year-old woman 2 houses down was about to make sure the truth could not be buried. Her name was Adeline, and she did not sleep much anymore, and her bedroom window looked directly across at the side of Danielle Reeves's house. When the shouting started that night, Adeline had done what a lot of frightened older people do now. She had picked up her phone and started recording through her window, because some instinct told her that whatever was happening deserved a witness. She had not gotten much. It was dark. The angle was bad. But she had gotten 2 things that turned out to be everything. She had gotten the flash of the gunshot, time-stamped at the exact moment. And she had gotten the audio, thin and distant but clear enough, a woman's calm voice, then a man screaming, "Drop it!" Then the shot. Then that same man's voice saying, "She lunged." Adeline was old, but she was not foolish. And she had lived long enough to know that a recording on one old woman's phone can disappear. But a recording that 1 million people have already seen cannot. She had also lived long enough, as a black woman in that country, to know exactly what happens to the video that only the police get to keep. So the next morning, before anyone official came knocking, she called her grandson, and she made him sit at her kitchen table until he had put it everywhere it could go. "You sure, Grandma?" the boy asked her. "Once it is out there, it is out there. They are going to know it was you." "Baby,
Adeline said. I am 80 years old. What are they going to do to me that time is not already doing? That child raised her hands and did everything right, and they shot her anyway. Somebody in this world is going to tell the truth about it. And it might as well be the old woman who saw it. By the next night, it had 2 million views. By the end of the week, it had passed 30 million. And it was no longer a local story about a homeowner and an officer. It was a national story about a decorated soldier shot in her own kitchen with her hands up by a man who turned his camera off and lied. And once a story gets that big, doors that are usually locked start to open. The kind of doors that even a police department cannot close. One of those doors was at the Pentagon. It is a rare thing, almost an unheard of thing, for the Department of Defense to say a public word about a local police matter. The military and the civilian world keep to their own sides of a very old line. They crossed it for Danielle Reeves. Someone at the Pentagon watched the same viral clip the rest of the country was watching. And then someone pulled her file. And what they found was a first lieutenant with a spotless record and the Soldier's Medal for heroism. A soldier the Army had already decided was one of its best. And the Department of Defense did something it almost never does. It released a statement. It did not use her name as a victim. It used her rank. It said that a decorated active duty officer had been gravely wounded in her own home, that the department expected full and transparent accountability, and that it would be watching. That statement changed the weather over the whole case. It told every prosecutor and every investigator and every nervous official in that town that the eyes on this were not just local and not just national, but institutional, and that the institution was the United States military, and that it did not intend to look away. And then, into the middle of all of it, walked a doctor with a folder full of the one thing a lie cannot survive: physical evidence. Her name was Dr. Grace Okafor, and she had been the trauma surgeon on call the night they brought Danielle Reeves in. And she had a problem with the story she was hearing on the news, because the wound did not match the words. Grace Okafor was not a political person. She was a surgeon, and surgeons deal in the plain, stubborn facts of the body. And the plain, stubborn facts of Danielle Reeves's body did not say what Derek Faulkner said they said. Faulkner's whole story rested on one word: lunged. He claimed Danielle had come at him, forward, aggressive, closing the distance with the pot, and that he had fired to stop a charging attacker. But Grace Okafor had spent hours inside that wound, and she knew the path the bullet had taken through Danielle's body. And the path told a different story. A story that could not be argued with, because bullets do not lie, and tissue does not take sides. The bullet had entered from the side and slightly behind. It had struck the collarbone and traveled on an angle that was only possible if Danielle had been turning away when it hit her. Not lunging forward, turning away. A person does not get shot on that trajectory while charging an officer. A person gets shot on that trajectory while recoiling, flinching, beginning to obey, doing exactly what a terrified innocent person does when a man screams at them. Grace Okafor wrote it all up, every measurement, every angle, in the cold, clear language of medicine. And she made herself available to investigators. And what she handed them was a forensic report that took Derek Faulkner's story and quietly, permanently took it apart. A colleague warned her about it. "You know whose side you are lining up against," the colleague said. "That is a career decision, Grace, not just a medical one. Departments have long memories." Grace Okafor looked at him for a moment. "I did not choose a side," she said. "The bullet chose a side. It went in from behind and to the left. I can either write down where it actually went, or I can write down where a liar wishes it had gone. Those are the only two options, and only one of them is medicine." So now there were three things. There was Salazar's footage. There was Adeline's video. There was Okafor's medical evidence. Three separate, independent, unshakable proofs that Danielle Reeves had been shot with her hands up and her body turned away. It should have been over. In a fair world, it would have been over. But Derek Faulkner had not even begun to fight yet, and the machinery that protects men like Derek Faulkner was just now waking up. 2 months after the shooting, they charged him. With the whole country watching and the Pentagon on the line,
in 3 kinds of evidence stacked against him. They could not charge him. But charging a man and convicting him are 2 very different things. And between them lies a long, dark road, and Derek Faulkner had powerful people who did not intend to let him walk it alone. The police union brought in a lawyer, an expensive one, a specialist in exactly this, in taking the indefensible and finding 2 inches of doubt to live in. For 3 weeks, the country had been sure it was over, sure the video and the medal in the Pentagon meant this one could not be spun. And then the lawyer got to work, and it stopped feeling over at all. Because he had a strategy, and the strategy was old and ugly and, in the past, terribly effective. The strategy was the split second. "We're not saying Officer Faulkner is a bad man," the lawyer would say. "We are saying he is a human being who had a fraction of a second to make an impossible decision in the dark, and that we cannot judge that fraction of a second from the safety of a courtroom. It was a misjudgment, a tragic, split-second misjudgment, not a crime. And around that core, they built the rest of it. They went after Danielle, a combat veteran, they suggested, home from a war, keyed up, maybe not entirely well, maybe suffering from things that make a person unpredictable. They never said the letters, but they let the jury pool hear the shape of them, unstable veteran. They went after Salazar, too, a disgruntled rookie, they whispered, a kid with a grudge against his partner, twisting an ambiguous moment to make himself a hero. For a while, it worked. That was the terrible part. For weeks and then months, the momentum swung back. The clean, simple horror of the viral video got muddied with doubt and delay and expensive words. And there were mornings when it truly looked like Derek Faulkner might climb out through those 2 inches of manufactured doubt, might reduce the whole thing to a tragic accident, might put on a sad face and walk free. And they came for Victor Salazar, too. Not in the courtroom, but in his life. The friend stopped calling first, then started crossing the street. Someone keyed his car. Someone left a dead rat in his mailbox. The oldest message there is. He was quietly moved to a desk in a back room where no one had to look at him. A man he had worked beside for 4 years told him, in a parking lot, that he hoped it was worth it, rat, and walked away. Twice, men Salazar did not recognize approached him to suggest, in friendly voices, that his memory of that night was probably fuzzier than he thought. That trauma does that. That no one would blame him if he softened it a little on the stand. He did not soften it, but he understood in those months exactly what he had traded away. And there were nights he sat alone in the back room he had been exiled to and wondered whether the truth was going to cost him everything and save no one. And the trial was still 11 months away. 11 months is a long time to hold a wound open. For Danielle, those 11 months were the hardest fight of her life, harder than any water, any fire, any war. The physical part was brutal enough. The surgeries on the collarbone, the permanent, absolute silence on her left side, the way she had to relearn how to stand in a room, how to know where a sound was coming from, how to sleep without the constant low panic of only hearing half the world. But the physical part was not the part that nearly broke her. The part that nearly broke her was the wall. Danielle Reeves had built her whole life on discipline, on bearing, on never letting anyone see the crack. And now, when she needed help more than she ever had, that same discipline turned into a prison. She would not let anyone in. She sat in her house in the new silence, and she went colder and quieter and further away. And she blamed herself, which is the cruelest thing a victim does. If I had not reached for the pot, she thought, 1,000 times a day, if I had just left it, if I had stood there like a statue and let it boil over onto the floor. She had done everything right, everything. And some of her had decided that the one small human motion of reaching to move a boiling pot was the thing she should have controlled, as if any of it had ever really been about the pot. The silence made it worse. She would sit in a room and only hear half of it, and she would catch herself turning her dead ear toward a sound, out of 31 years of habit, hearing nothing, and each time it was a small, fresh grief. She stopped answering the door. She stopped answering messages. The army offered counseling and she declined it. Friends called and she let it ring. She was doing the thing she had watched other soldiers do after bad deployments. walling herself up brick by brick, and she knew she was doing it, and she could not stop.
Her mother saw it. Loretta Reeves had raised this girl alone, and she knew the exact sound of her daughter disappearing, and she refused to let it happen quietly.
"Danielle," her mother said one night, sitting close so Danielle could see her lips and read them, "you are trying to carry this the way you carry everything, alone, in silence, in bearing. And I am telling you, that is not strength this time. That is you drowning in the flood you are supposed to be pulling yourself out of." "I cannot hear anything on that side anymore, Mama," Danielle said. And it was the first crack in 11 months. "I do everything right and it still took my ear. What was it all for?" And her mother took her daughter's face in both her hands, the way you hold something you refuse to lose, and said, "Then you are going to have to find a way to make them hear you. All of them. The whole country. You have never once in your life been quiet when it mattered. Do not start now." She almost quit anyway. She came within an inch of it. There was a week, a bad one, when Danielle told the prosecutors she did not want to testify, that she could not sit in a room and be called unstable and dangerous by a lawyer while a jury studied her for cracks, that she had given enough and she just wanted to disappear into her silence and be left alone. Nobody would have blamed her. She had already lost her hearing, her peace, her sense of safety in her own home. It was not fair to ask her for more. What turned her around was a phone call, relayed through a TTY line, because she could no longer take it the normal way, from a man she had not spoken to since Afghanistan. Brigadier General Raymond Stokes had commanded her unit. He had been there the day they pinned the soldier's medal on her. And he had heard, the way generals hear things, that his best young officer was thinking about folding. "Lieutenant," he told her. And even through the flat text of the relay, she could feel the iron in it. "I watched you go into that water 3 times. 3 times, when a cell in your body was telling you to stay on the bank. You did not stay on the bank then. Do not stay on the bank now. And Reeves, hear me on this. On the day you walk into that courtroom, look at the front row. I will be sitting in it every single day. I am not going to say a word. I am just going to be there, in uniform, so that everyone who looks at you also has to look at the army standing behind you." Danielle Reeves decided that night that she was going to fight. She wrote him back on the relay, slowly, one line. "I did not stay on the bank, sir. I am not going to start now." She was going to walk into that courtroom in her dress blues, with every ribbon and every award, with her spine straight and her chin level, deaf in one ear and unbreakable in every other way. She was going to let them try to call her unstable, while she sat there being the most disciplined person in the room. She was going to make the jury look at the exact thing the defense most needed them to forget, which was that she was not a threat and never had been, that she was a soldier who had run into floodwater to save strangers and had then been shot in her own home for the crime of reaching to move a pot of tea off a stove. She just did not know yet about the piece of evidence that was going to end the whole thing. Neither did the prosecutors. Neither did anyone. It had been sitting in an evidence file for 11 months, and no one had thought to listen to the whole thing. 11 months. That is how long it took to get to trial. 11 months of Danielle in silence, of Salazar being called a rat, of a lie slowly hardening into a defense. And then, on a cold Monday in a packed federal courthouse, it finally began. And from the very first morning, it was not what Derek Faulkner's lawyers had hoped for. They had built their whole strategy on the idea that they could make the jury doubt, that they could turn a clear thing cloudy. And then Danielle Reeves walked in. She came in her army dress blues, pressed to a razor, the soldier's medal at her chest, and she sat with a bearing so perfect that it was its own kind of testimony. Whatever the defense wanted to say about an unstable, unpredictable veteran evaporated more every hour that she sat there. Calm, controlled, dignified, turning her head slightly to bring her good ear toward each speaker, missing nothing. There was a small thing she did every morning that the jury came to watch for. She could no longer hear the bailiff call the court to rise, so she watched the room. And the instant the first person moved, she was already up, straight-backed, faster than anyone, a soldier who had learned to read a room she could only half hear. It should not have meant anything.
It meant everything. 12 jurors watched a woman the defense kept calling damaged and dangerous carry herself every single day with more discipline than anyone else in the building. And slowly the words the defense needed them to believe stopped fitting the woman they were looking at.
And in the front row, exactly as he had promised, sat Brigadier General Raymond Stokes in his own uniform, saying nothing every single day. The jury could not help but see it. The wounded soldier and the general who had come to sit behind her, and the space between them full of an entire institution's silent judgment. Then Victor Salazar took the stand. He did not perform. He told it plainly, and he told the part that damned him along with the part that damned his partner. He told them about the half-second. He told them he had seen it coming and had not moved in time, that he would carry that for the rest of his life. And then he told them what he saw, without the merciful blur the defense had prayed for. Hands up, a pot, a calm voice, a shot into a woman who was already turning away, and a partner who started lying before he started helping. The defense attacked him exactly as expected, disgruntled, unreliable, a rat with a grudge. Salazar took it without flinching. "I lost everything to be in this chair," he said quietly. "My job, my friends, my whole idea of what I was. My own partner will not look at me. People I trusted put a dead animal in my mailbox. I did not do any of that for a grudge. I did it because I was standing 2 feet away when it happened, and I am the only one left who can tell you the truth about it. And I have to live with the fact that I did not stop it. Telling you now is the only piece of it I still get to control." The prosecutor asked him one last question. "Officer Salazar, in your training, how long does it take an officer to assess a scene and decide a person is not a threat?" "Longer than it took him to decide she was," Salazar said. "And a lot longer than it took him to decide what to say about it afterward." It was powerful. It might even have been enough, but the prosecution was not going to leave it to might. By the 5th day of the trial, the split-second defense was still standing, still whispering doubt into the jury box, and it was starting to look like 2 inches of doubt might just be enough. And then the prosecution did the one thing nobody had done in 11 months. In all that time, with every camera and every angle argued to death, one investigator had gone back to the very first record of that night, to the thing everyone had walked straight past, and had finally done the obvious thing. They had listened to the entire 911 call. Everyone had focused on the cameras. That was the natural thing. It was a case about body cameras, about the one that was switched off and the one that was left on, and the whole country had argued about cameras for 11 months. Nobody had thought hard about the phone on the table by the front door. But Danielle had never hung up. She had set the phone down with the line open, and it had stayed open, connected to the dispatch center, recording through the entire event. It had sat there on that little table, and it had captured, in clean, unbroken audio, every second of what happened in that house. And when the prosecutor stood up and told the court that the jury was about to hear the 911 recording in full, for the first time, Derek Faulkner's lawyer came half out of his chair, because he understood, a beat too late, what was coming. The courtroom went silent, and they played it. They heard Danielle's calm voice giving her name and her rank and her active duty status, minutes before the officers even arrived, destroying forever the claim that no one could have known who she was. They heard the dispatcher tell her to stay on the line. They heard her narrate her own movements, hands visible, cooperative, patient. They heard her lead the officers to the kitchen. They heard her say, soft and clear, "It is just a pot. It is boiling. I am moving it off the heat so nobody gets hurt." They heard Derek Faulkner scream, "Drop it." They heard her say, "Look at my hand." They heard the shot, and then the whole courtroom held its breath, because the recording kept going. With the woman bleeding on the floor, and the echo still hanging in the air, in a recording with a timestamp accurate to the second, they heard Derek Faulkner's voice say the words, "She lunged at me. You all saw it. She lunged." Not after a minute of shocked confusion. Not after the long fog of a traumatic split second while a horrified man tried to understand what he had done. Seconds. He had begun building the lie in the time it takes to exhale. Before he checked her pulse. Before he called for a medic. Before he did one single thing a human being does after an honest mistake.
The dispatcher, still on the line, had heard all of it. The recording had heard all of it. And now the jury heard all of it, in Derek Faulkner's own voice. And they understood what they were listening to. They were listening to a man reach for a lie the way another man reaches for a fire extinguisher, by reflex, by training, because some deep and practiced part of him already knew the drill.
It was not a man who had made a terrible mistake. It was a man who already knew exactly how this was supposed to go. The split-second defense did not survive that recording. Nothing could have. After that, it was not a trial anymore. It was a collapse. The prosecution laid the recording alongside the timestamp on Adeline's video, and the two lined up to the second, one confirming the other. They laid both alongside Salazar's footage, the visual truth matching the audio truth matching the neighbor's truth. And they laid all of it alongside Dr. Grace O'Coffer's forensic report, the bullet's path through the body proving Danielle had been turning away, proving in the cold language of trajectory that the word lunged had never been true. Every pillar the defense had built cracked at once. The unstable veteran turned out to be the calmest voice on the recording. The disgruntled rookie turned out to be corroborated by 3 independent sources. The split-second misjudgment turned out to be a lie that a man had started telling before the smoke cleared. Derek Faulkner sat at the defense table and got smaller as the days went on, and there was a moment, near the end, that some people in that courtroom noticed. When the recording of his own voice saying "she lunged" played for the 3rd time, something crossed his face that was not defiance. It looked, for just a second, like a man hearing himself clearly for the first time, a man realizing that the story he had told so fast and so smoothly that night had not been panic at all, that it had come out of somewhere deep and practiced and rotten inside him, and that everyone in the room could now hear the same thing he was finally hearing. It did not make him innocent. If anything, it made him worse. But it made him, for that 1 second, a human being confronting the exact shape of what he was, a man who had told himself for a year that he was the victim of an impossible split second, hearing the proof, in his own voice, that there had been no split second at all. Whatever he had been protecting all those months, some story about himself as a good man in a bad moment, died quietly at that table, while his own recorded voice played on. The jury went out to deliberate. They were not gone long. They were back in under 4 hours. The bailiff had to touch Danielle lightly on the shoulder to tell her, because she could not hear the announcement that the jury was returning, and she stood and turned her good ear toward the front, and waited in her own silence to learn whether the country had heard her. Anyone who has spent time around courtrooms will tell you that a fast verdict in a serious case usually means only one thing. And when the jury filed back in after less than 4 hours on a case this size, the whole room understood before a word was read. Guilty on every count. Guilty of the civil rights violation committed under color of law, the specific crime of a government officer using the power of the state to deprive a citizen of her most basic rights. Guilty of obstruction of justice for the camera he switched off and the lie he built. Guilty, unanimously, completely, with nowhere left to hide. The judge did not soften the sentence, and the judge did not rush it. He spoke about the badge and the trust that comes with it, and the specific horror of a person turning that trust into a weapon against exactly the citizen they had sworn to protect. He spoke about a woman who had called for help, identified herself, raised her hands, and done every single thing right, and had been shot anyway, and then slandered as she lay bleeding. 18 years, the judge said. Federal prison, no parole. Derek Faulkner was let out in handcuffs, and Danielle Reeves watched him go with the same still, level composure she had held for 11 months. And she did not smile, because there was nothing in any of it to smile about. She had won, and she was still deaf, and no verdict on earth was ever going to give her back the ear, or the peace, or the sound of the world coming from her left side. Behind her, in the front row, Brigadier General Raymond Stokes stood, and quietly, so that only the people nearby could see it, he brought his hand up and held a salute, not to the court, but to the wounded lieutenant in the row ahead of him. And Danielle turned and saw it and returned it, and for one moment, the whole 11 months and the war before it and the silence to come all lived inside that single exchange between two soldiers who understood exactly what it had cost. That was the thing the cameras never quite captured. The justice was real, and it was earned, and it changed nothing about the silence she was going to live in for the rest of her life. The man who took her hearing would spend 18 years thinking about it. She would spend the rest of hers living it. So she decided, instead of letting that silence defeat her, to make it deafening. She could have retired. Everyone expected her to retire. A wounded veteran, a national symbol, a woman who had every reason in the world to take her settlement and her medal and disappear into a quiet life she had more than earned. She did the opposite. She started, of all places, in front of a room full of lawmakers. Danielle Reeves testified, in her dress blues, with an interpreter at her side, about the camera Derek Faulkner had switched off 11 seconds before he shot her, and about how close that single deliberate act had come to burying the truth forever. She told them that the only reason she was alive to speak was that other cameras, and one open phone line she had never thought twice about, had caught what his darkness was meant to hide. "I did everything you were supposed to do," she told them, her voice steady and flat, and carrying to every corner of that room. "I called for help. I said my name and my rank. I raised my hands. I stayed calm. I stayed on the line. I did it all. And a man turned off his camera and shot me anyway. And then he lied. And it almost worked. If it can almost work against a decorated officer with 3 cameras and a general behind her, then think, please, about how easily it works every single day against someone with none of that. I am not here for me. I already lost my ear. I am here for the next person, the one with no medal and no witness and no viral video. I am here so that the next time, the truth is not something a man can switch off with his thumb." And the law changed. The state passed a statute that came to be called Danielle's Law, and it made the intentional deactivation of a police body camera during a citizen interaction a felony in its own right, a crime with its own weight, so that no officer could ever again turn off the truth as easily as flipping a switch and expect to pay nothing for it. Then the change went national, in a different form. The Department of Defense, which had crossed an old line once to stand behind her, made it permanent. It issued a directive that any local police incident involving active-duty military personnel would now automatically trigger a joint federal and military investigation, so that no soldier who survived a war would ever again be left to the mercy of a local cover-up at home. For as long as anyone could remember, the military and civilian law enforcement had kept a careful distance from each other. A single deaf lieutenant had reached across that distance and welded the two together, and everyone in the building where they wrote the directive knew whose kitchen it had been written in. One woman, shot in her own home and left half deaf, had changed the law of a state and the policy of the entire military. But she was not done, because the thing she really wanted to change was not written in any statute. It was the half-second itself. The instinct. The look in a Derek Faulkner's eyes before he decides. She took a job nobody had ever held before. Rather than leave the Army, Danielle Reeves accepted a new role as a liaison between the military and law enforcement agencies across the country, and she spent her days walking into the exact rooms where the harm began. Police academies, training halls, rooms full of young officers who had a badge and a gun, and a head full of the same instincts that had nearly killed her. She walked into police academies and training halls full of young officers who had a badge and a gun and a head full of the same instincts that had nearly killed her. And she taught them de-escalation, restraint, and how to recognize the military identifiers Derek Faulkner had looked straight through. But mostly, just by standing there, death in one ear and decorated and calm, she taught them the cost of one bad half-second. And she learned to live inside her silence instead of drowning in it. She learned sign language. She found a community of people who lived in the quiet she had been thrown into, and she stopped treating her deafness as only a wound and started treating it as a fact about herself she could use. The soldier who once kept everyone out had, in the end, been forced by her own injury to let a whole new world in. Her mother had told her, She would have to find a way to make them hear her.
She had found it.
At the start of every single training session she ever gave, in every academy in every city, Danielle Reeves did the same thing. She stood at the front of the room in her dress blues, silent, and she waited until every young officer was looking at her. And then she held up a simple white placard, hand-lettered, that she carried everywhere she went.
The officers would read it in the quiet. It said, "I cannot hear you, but I am still in uniform, so you will hear me." There was one training, late in that first year, that she would come back to for the rest of her life. In the back of the room sat a young officer with his own quiet secret, a man who signed to his deaf daughter every night at home, and after the session, he came up to Danielle, and instead of speaking, he raised his hands and signed to her, slowly, the way she was still learning to receive it. "Thank you," he signed. "My little girl is going to grow up in a world with people like you in it." Danielle Reeves, who had held her composure through a shooting, a lie, 11 months, and a trial, had to turn away from that young man for a moment before she could sign back.
She had lost the hearing in her left ear on the floor of her own kitchen, shot by a man who thought her silence would be the end of her.
Instead, her silence became the loudest thing in the country, and a voice that an entire nation, in the end, had no choice but to hear.